and welcome to 5 Things to Know, a Tax Talk Today exclusive. I'm joined today by Martin Armstrong, Chair of the Internal Revenue Service Advisory Council, known as IRSAC. Mr. Armstrong is the Vice President of Payroll Shared Services for Charter Communications, a Fortune 100 company and the second largest cable operator in the United States, and is the current IRSAC Chair. Martin, on behalf of our viewers, it's my pleasure to welcome you to Tax Talk Today, where IRS representatives and tax industry leaders come together to share their knowledge and experiences working in federal tax law. As a career tax practitioner, small business owner, and industry advocate, I really appreciate all you've done to advise the IRS of relevant tax administration issues. Recently, IRSAC published its November 23 public report, and I have a few questions about that. Before I ask those questions, I need to know a little about you. Can you tell us a little about your roles and experiences working with IRSAC and the National Public Liaison's Office?
Sure thing. Well, thank you for having me, Alan. It's a pleasure to be on this show, and I love talking about IRSAC and everything that we've done, especially with our 2003 IRSAC Public Report. But my tenure with IRSAC, or the Internal Revenue Service Advisory Council, really began in 2020. I was, appointed to the advisory committee there, and I actually started off in the TEGE, or the Tax Exempt Government Entity subgroup. IRSAC is divided into 5 subgroups that we have, and TEGE was one of them. And after 1 month being in the Tax Exempt Government Entity, I went back to our IRSAC leadership and said I was surely misplaced. So they reassigned me to the Wage and Investment subgroup. And I was there since 2020. I became the chair for the Wage and Investment subgroup in 2021. Then in 2022, last year, I became the vice chair of IRSAC. And then this year, of course, the chair. So that's been my journey. It's been a great journey. I tell you, it's really a privilege to be here, to be on the IRSAC, because I mean, as a tax practitioner, where else are you going to meet people who actually run the IRS, all the BOD commissioners, the Business Operating Division commissioners, and the Internal Revenue Service Commissioner himself. So it's been a great run. You know, my work with IRSAC really stems from the Communications and Liaison. That is a group within the IRS that the National Public Liaison, or NPL, reports to. And so, a lot of people probably don't know about NPL, National Public Liaison, but they really manage all of the stakeholder relationships and for professional organizations between those organizations and the relationships in the Internal Revenue Service. So specifically, NPL, they manage the IRSAC, Internal Revenue Service Advisory Council, and they also manage another advisory council called ETAC, or Electronic Tax Administration Advisory Committee. And so they help us schedule all of our meetings, get all the speakers. A lot of people don't know this about NPL also, but they also run the national taxpayers or national tax forums across the country. They just started back up again in 2023 after I think some absences during COVID. But those national tax forums are heavily attended with a lot of tax practitioners meeting IRS officials and executives, asking questions that people want to know about. And finally, I'll say with NPL, we really can't do IRSAC's business without NPL's staff. So Terry Lemons, he's the Chief of Communication and Liaison. It's been very helpful. Mel Hardy, who's the Director of the Office of National Public Liaison, and also John Lippold, the Branch Chief, and he's the Tax Pro Partnerships and Advisory Groups designated officer. So, that's how this all works together, Alan, between your IRSAC, my introduction in IRSAC, and our partnership with NPL. It all works well together.
Well, I do appreciate that shout out to NPL, and I'm sure that John Mellon will as well. I know that they're quite interested in getting that promotion out there. I also, since we're on the topic real quick, I would like to mention that there is a practitioner liaison in every area of the country. So it's important for practitioners to know that they have an ability to reach out to this liaison's office for more information or for guidance should they need it. I try to attend at least 2 or 3 meetings a year of my local liaison's office just to have that communication going there. knowing what systemic issues are popping up, things along those lines. But let's get back to IRSAC here real quick, if we could, because I've got so many more questions I want to ask you. Have you seen, being that you've been involved now for 4 years, you've seen some, I'm sure you've seen a few things going on. How have you seen the focus of the IRSAC evolve over the years that you've been involved, as well as maybe prior to, if you have any input on that? And can you comment the importance of tax professional involvement in the advisory committee work?
Sure. That's an interesting question because, as I mentioned, I started with IRSAC in 2020. And, coincidentally, that's when the COVID-19 pandemic happened. So, since my entire tenure with IRSAC, the IRSAC, the IRS, the everyday taxpayer, everybody's been experienced and negatively, I would say, with the COVID-19 pandemic, including the Internal Revenue Service. I think everybody knows about that. But I would say, to answer your question about the tax professionals' involvement, when you think about all of the different challenges that the IRSs have had since 2020, and I'm talking about the COVID-19 pandemic specifically, it really put a monkey wrench in some of the BAU operations every single day. But, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the IRS has had a lot of opportunities to show its worth in its partnership because of all the credits that came out of the COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, specifically the CARES Act, it's Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act that was enacted in March of 2020. You think about all the credits that came out of the COVID-19 pandemic. We're talking about the child tax credit, the recovery rebate credit, the premium tax credit, 3 rounds of economic impact payments, the employer tax credits like credit for sick and family leave, the employee retention credit, which is still in the news to this day, some 4 years later, and the paid leave for credit and for vaccines, paid leave credit for vaccines, I should say. All of these things have had a huge impact. And so how does this impact the everyday tax professional, and how do we get that involved with some of these advisory groups? You think about all these things that has happened, all the credits I just mentioned, the tax practitioner, that community, we've had to pivot a lot. And really, we're doing all of this for the average taxpayer. Even this year, and I would safely say that we're, for the most part, over COVID-19. But when you think about even new legislation that's come up, like the lowering threshold for 1099-K reporting and the various energy credits, all of this really sums up one common theme, Alan, and that is really the tax landscape is always changing. And the advisory committees like the Internal Revenue Service Advisory Council, IRSAC, or the ETAC, the Electronic Tax Administration Advisory Council I mentioned earlier, we all need advisements. Those advisory committees need involvement from tax professionals across this country to lend their time, their commitment, and specific expertise. Because I have to tell you, I've not met one tax professional that knows everything about tax. I mentioned earlier our IRSAC, we are divided into subgroups, right? So we have information reporting subgroup, which is not even a bod for the Internal Revenue Service, but we found that necessary to become a subgroup. And we began that subgroup, I want to say in 2021. So we have subject matter experts in information reporting. Of course, we have LB&I, Large Business and International. We have tax professionals for that. We have wage and investment, tax professional expertise, subject matter expertise in that, the small business self-employment, and the TEGE, the tax exempt and government entity. All these tax professionals have expertise, and I've not met one that knows everything and could call themselves a SME across all of our subgroups in the IRSAC or the BODs within the Internal Revenue Service. So we need, and the advisory council need tax professionals to, again, commit their time, their commitment of time, commitment, and their expertise to the IRS so we can make these much needed improvements and these innovations that people want to complain about sometimes that's not present. And the technology recommendations to make this tax system, I would say, more effective and more efficient for all the stakeholders, whether it be the everyday taxpayer, tax professionals, the Internal Revenue Service themselves, for everybody involved. So, a lot of it has gone on, especially since my tenure. a lot of credits have been created, and therein lies why we need tax professionals more involved with these advisory councils to make everything just better for everyone.
Well, I can tell you that I've been in tax for over almost 35 years now, and I know nothing about it. Because if I think I've learned it all, I will quit because I stopped learning altogether at that point. There's just no possible way with a 85,000 word tax code that we have, or something ridiculous like that. It could be even more. Who knows? Anyways, I digress. Let me move on here. I understand the IRSAC just released its public report for the year. Give us the 5 top, if there is five top. I'm sure there's probably in your mind maybe 50 top, but let's narrow it down to at least 5 or 6 of those if you could.
Okay. Well, if you don't mind, Alan, I'm going to go and just give you a high-level summary of the report, because it is 225 pages. It's probably the most number of pages, and that's only because we have a lot of appendices and charts in the back to support all the work that you see in the report. But I will just say this, Alan. In 2023, our 2023 IRSAC Public Report, it was released November the 9th. It includes 1 general topic and 22 subgroup reports. So the general topic, that might be an issue that we're working on researching for the year, and then publicizing and releasing in this public report, that really is not specifically earmarked to one of our subgroups, the 5 subgroups that I mentioned earlier. So we have 1 general report that fits that description, and then 22 subgroup report topics. So, as I mentioned, IRSAC has 5 subgroups, and each of those subgroups work on different topics. So we have 22 of those. So altogether, 23 topics. And amongst those 23 topics that we talk about in our 2023 IRSAC Public Report, we have 121 recommendations for the IRS to consider. That's a lot of recommendations, but it's a lot of information. And so, just to highlight the report, and I'll have to say, what a great year to serve on IRSAC. As we mentioned earlier, there's been a lot of changes in the tax environment. And one of the changes that the IRS experienced that we talk about in our IRSAC report, Alan, is the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 and the much needed funding that the IRS has been asking for from Congress year over year over year. Now, as you know, that started out to be $80 billion, 20 billion was clawed back. So now it's still working with the $60 billion that, that must be used and allocated. Another highlight that we have in our IRSAC report, Alan, is the IRS Strategic Operating Plan. Because of the Inflation Reduction Act, or the IRA funding, the IRS wanted to put out to the public and the Treasury how they were going to spend that money. So this really historic 10-year IRS Strategic Operating Plan lists 42 initiatives that are tied to 5 objectives, and we mentioned that in our public report. We also mentioned the IRS pivoting back to BAU operations post-COVID, and then welcoming a new IRS commissioner. So I want to go back to the strategic operating plan, because we really highlight this. And if you read the report, you'll notice that we have Appendix A and Appendix B in the back of the report. And we have those Appendix A and B because what we decided to do as our IRSAC group for 2023 is, because we felt so strongly about these strategic operating plans and those 42 initiatives and the 5 objectives that they're tied to, we went back for the past 5 years, Alan, 5 years, from 2019 all the way through current 2023. And we took a look at all of our recommendations over that 5-year period of time issued in each IRSAC public report from 19 through 2023, even this year. And we tied back each recommendation to those 5 objectives that are mentioned in this IRS strategic operating plan, along with the 42 initiatives. So you'll see in the back of our book, our report, I should say, that we have a number of recommendations over 5 years. I mean, this year alone, we had 121 recommendations that are tied back to the strategic operating plan. That's really the blueprint for the IRS for the next 10 years. So that was an important thing I wanted to mention as far as a highlight. And another thing, Alan, I'll mention in the highlight is our continuum. We've been doing this at least since my tenure in 2020. Mentioning in our IRSAC report via a general report topic, probably the real importance of the IRS to fund the Congress to fund the IRS year over year over year, so it can meet their operating plan. It can keep up with inflation as far as the cost of money. So this year we have one general report, and that one general report is exactly that. We want to make it known to lawmakers that they have to fund the IRS year over year and not use the IRA funding money, which is a lot of lawmakers say, what are you guys going to do? We gave you $80 billion. Why do you want more? Well, it was that $80 billion, now $60 billion, has already been earmarked to make improvements in technology and resources and collection and everything. So that doesn't lend itself to how is the IRS going to keep up year over year funding so they can just keep the lights on. And so that is what we talk about in our report, which is a highlight. Another highlight, Alan, I would say, is the 1099-K form. Beginning this year, and you probably noticed in 2023, when we start, issuing the 1099 series forms for next year, this year, the IRS lowered the reporting threshold for 1099-K. In previous years, it was a $20,000 threshold with 200 or more transactions. If you met that threshold, you were going to be issued a 1099-K. This year, that reporting threshold has been lowered to simply saying any transaction $600 or more, you're going to get a 1099-K. We know that is going to increase the issuances of 1099-K by millions, no doubt about it. So we talk about that in our report as well. We also talk about cryptocurrency payments, and with regards to allowing the IRS to accept cryptocurrency as a source of payment to pay a tax bill. And I will say that right now, the law it currently has the provision that says cryptocurrency for tax payments is not an acceptable form of tax payments. But what taxpayers, and we write about this in the report, is you can go to a cryptocurrency type of entity if you have cryptocurrency and say, hey, I want to pay the IRS with my cryptocurrency. What they will do, the third party entity, they will convert the cryptocurrency into US currency, which is an acceptable form to pay your bill. And they will then send that US currency to the IRS as your tax payment. They take care of any fluctuations of currency value as far as that is concerned, because the IRS is still, at the end of the day, even though you may have a cryptocurrency account, you've asked your provider to make that payment on your behalf, that provider is still going to give the IRS your payment in US dollars. So we talk about some states in the report using cryptocurrency as forms of tax payments, and how the IRS can learn and use their experiences to eventually get to that point at some point in time. It's a very interesting topic. As a matter of fact, we had our youngest member of the IRSAC, 23 years old, 22, I think. He just graduated from UNC at Chapel Hill just this past May. And he is the one who led that cryptocurrency discussion in our report. So it's a very interesting topic. I would definitely advise that you read that for sure. We talk about a wide range of things like modifying a heavy vehicle use tax return. We talk about IRS pay preparer penalties, whereas, as a tax preparer, the IRS does audit tax preparers, and there are penalties if they deem that, some returns that they have submitted or issued under their PTIN number seem a bit suspect. So we talk about those penalties because they're severe. So if you're an IRS tax preparer, make sure that you're doing everything that you need to do to authenticate what you report on behalf of your taxpayer. We talk about interesting things like increasing the threshold for slot machine jackpot winnings, limitations with filing prior year do-it-yourself tax returns. And of course, we talk about forms modernization. I'll end it there, where the IRS has really created, within the wage and investment bod that they have, a whole team that works on ensuring that tax forms are accessible via mobile devices, so we can meet the taxpayer where they are and on any device, I'd say. And so we go into a lot of explanation about what work the IRS is doing to modernize their forms and to make forms electronically fileable versus just having to mail it in, because there's no electronic means for that. So we have 23 topics in all, Alan, and it's just a very good resourceful report. If you're a tax practitioner, you have to have a read for this report so you can actually understand what's going on in our current environment with the IRS and these advisory boards, specifically IRSAC, has recommended for our tax system being more efficient and more effective.
Well, thank you. That's quite an involved conversation, and I do appreciate that. I think it's important to note that this is an ongoing situation. IRSAC has been around for a long time, and it's a constantly evolving, and it's there for the purpose of trying to help the IRS and the tax practitioner as well as taxpayer communities communicate this,
Right.
to some extent. So we'll keep moving on here. I found it interesting. You plugged the forums earlier and the 1099K. I happen to be speaking at the forums this year on 1099K because I can see where this is going. I've been doing a lot of speaking on that around the country. But anyways, what did you find this to be your biggest challenge or achievement for IRSAC during this year as chair?
Well, I'll say I have to go back to the funding. We can have all kind of suggestions to the IRS about modernization, about systems, about capabilities with AI. But if you don't have any money to do that, all of that is really just a bunch of noise, I have to say. And I hate to say it that way, but that's what it really is. So I think the biggest challenge, and I'll hang on that as part of your question, but the challenge is this threat of not having enough money to make all these modernization projects happen over this 10-year period of time that IRA was earmarked for. I mean, we've already had a clawback of $20 billion. Now we're working with $60 billion. I'm sure you've been in the news and you've heard that every time Congress wants to fund a new initiative, they want to take money from this IRA funding to try to fund it, which will leave, if that is ever successful, above and beyond the $20 billion that have already clawed back, it's going to leave the IRS with just that much lower amount of money to make all these process improvements that we've talked about. And, when you go back, Alan, and reach back to what the strategic operating plan was all about and really how this money was going to be earmarked, you talk about impacts to taxpayer services. So, when you look at the SOP, the IRS strategic operating plan, the taxpayer services, one of the hallmarks was to dramatically improve taxpayer services to meet the obligations of taxpayers and for them to receive the tax incentives that they're already eligible for. So that's going to be impacted. No one wants to impact the taxpayer experience, I will tell you that. And then resolving taxpayer issues is another operating plan objective. And that is to quickly resolve taxpayer issues when they arise. Right now, it could take, I would say, several months, even a year or two for some things to actually get resolved over a period of time. And so this IRA money is going to help reduce the resolution time for that. And then expanded enforcement. We've all talked about the tax gap. And so, over the years, I don't think that has really been addressed with any real kind of resources. So that is one of the strategic operating objectives as well. And then cutting edge technology. There's no one who's going to disagree that the IRS needs to have updated and more cutting to their infrastructure, to data, to analytics, so everything can just operate more effectively. And then the workforce. A lot of people are leaving the workforce in the IRS. They have 80-some thousand employees right now, but you have a lot of people who are retiring. The IRS probably are losing a lot of potential candidates because of the wage rates that they, are kind of restricted to pay out. So the workforce is an investment that has to absolutely be made with this IRA funding, because the IRS needs to attract, to retain, and empower highly skilled, diversified workforce, because they need to develop a culture that invites people to come in and say, yes, I want to work for the service and won't have to worry about making ends meet. And I think that's just an important objective. So The biggest challenge, to answer your question, is trying to meet the strategic operating plan objectives, those 5 objectives that we talked about, and the 42 initiatives that are underneath those 5 objectives with the money that they have. And hopefully it will be $60 billion. And we will be talking about this because they have 10 years to use that. And $60 billion is a lot of money, but when over a 10-year period of time with all the different efforts and projects they have earmarked for that money, it'll go by quickly. That is the biggest threat, no question about it.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm all over the funding for the IRS. I watched the IRS struggle to function over the years. I do representation work in my practice, so I'm dealing with the frontline employees on a regular basis, and I see that, and I see the frustration they have.
Yeah.
So, ideally, and I just want to bring this up because we're having this conversation, but ideally the IRS can get these employees hired before the senior ones retire, so there's people there to train them, which is the next battle that a current battle they're having right now. But let's move on. I think it's a great organization. You mentioned ETech, we've got IRSAC. If a tax practitioner wants to be involved, and I hope that there's plenty out there that are watching this saying, I want to do this. Also, I want to be able to make a difference. How do they go about doing that? Is there an open season and where can they find out?
I am so glad you asked that question, because let me tell you something, Alan. We have so many subject matter experts across all the 4 bods that the IRS has, the 5 subgroups that Internal Revenue Service Advisory or IRSAC has. So I'm going to make a call for action for anybody who's a tax practitioner that feels that you have time and the commitment to lend your expertise to the IRSAC, and that is to file an application. So the IRSAC open season, it begins, and this is for next year, usually begins after the filing season deadline, so around April or so, and it ends early May, mid-June. So look out for, I'd say, the latter part of April and early part of June to submit your application to become an IRSAC member. Because I'll have to tell you, we have 32 members on the council this year. And I will say, Alan, most of us have obviously an expertise in one of the subgroups that we're assigned to, working with IRSAC. But at the end of the day, every single person in our 32-member IRSAC group, they all want to do a good job with representing the complexity of the IRS and making that simple and easy for the everyday taxpayer to digest and to understand and to make their tax planning decisions much easier as opposed to today. We need tax practitioners to be able to explain that to everyday taxpayers. So, and I would say the everyday taxpayer, it is not the person that has like first world problems where they may have a big tax bill and they'll go cash out maybe some equity income or something and pay the bill. They may not like it, but they have the means to do that. What we're talking about, Alan, is the everyday taxpayer that may have a bill for $1,200 to the IRS, and that is a big concern of how they're going to pay that. We know interest is running along the way before that bill is paid. And so this is what we do that for. We do this for the everyday taxpayer to make this very complex tax system that we have simpler and easier for the everyday taxpayer to understand so they can make informed decisions about their tax planning. So that is what it is. I invite everyone who is interested in IRSAC. It is an absolute honor and a privilege because you are going to be able to meet and interact with all these BOD commissioners and everyone else in the service that make this tax system run. So put in an application, look for that at the end of April, mid-June, and make sure you file that application because it is really a highlight of my professional tax career. And I would suffice it to say of the other 31 members as well. So that's how you get involved.
Well, I know this is 5 things to know, so I'm going to call this one 5.1 because I have one more question for you. Since you brought up, you made a comment about time involvement. And I think it's important that those, before they start, everybody loves to sign up and volunteer until they find out what that means.
Yes.
I'm not going to, I would obviously never hold you to this, but if you could just give our viewers an understanding of what that means. What time involvement are we talking about? A few hours a month, or we talk something along those. Give us a general idea.
Sure. No, that's a great question. So I would say once you sign up for IRSAC and you become a member, you're going to be going to the Internal Revenue Service headquarters right there in DC, 1111 Constitution Avenue. You'll be there 5 times a year. So you'll be there, I want to say it's in January, April, July, September, and November. I think that covered that off. And so you'll be physically going there, meeting with people in person. Now, in between those meetings, you'll probably be meeting with your subgroup maybe once a month, probably every other month. And it's probably going to be an hour or two. So not much time, because the work that you're doing, because you're going to be assigned to a subgroup within the Internal Revenue Service Advisory Council for the type of work that you're already doing. Believe me, it's going to benefit you, because it is something you're going to need to know for your everyday job anyway, because you're already a SME in the subgroup that you've been assigned to. So, but to answer your question, I would say an hour, even if you meet every month, it's just an hour. Sometimes it's just every other month. And we have a 2-day meeting. Okay. So when you go down to the IRS headquarters, those 5 times a year, it's for 2 days. So that's a commitment. Believe me, it pales in comparison to the other projects that I've worked on, where they're much more time consuming. This one does commit some time, but it's well worth it.
Well, Martin, thank you very much. This has been really great. I do appreciate it. And thank you so much for joining us on 5 Things to Know. On behalf of our viewers, I'd like to also thank you for your service in your current role as IRSAC Chair. Your work really benefits the tax preparer community and our nation's taxpayers. Thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you on another Tax Talk Today program. I'd like to thank you all for watching, and as always, it's been great learning with you. Be sure to join us again on an upcoming Tax Talk Today program.